So back in 1975, the United States federal government they completely stopped counting private domestic adoption.
Right. Just completely walked away from the math.
Which is wild to think about. I mean,
Oh.
for over 50 years now, the basic arithmetic of thousands of human lives has just been this massive, totally undocumented vacuum.
Yeah. And, when a government abandons the responsibility of witnessing something like that, a major social practice, that void doesn't just sit there empty.
Right. Something fills it.
Exactly. The industry itself steps in. They start counting themselves, writing their own regulations, and funding the exact research that conveniently proves their own necessity.
Well, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today, we are immersing you in this really profound paradox.
Yeah, it's a fascinating
We're
one.
basing this on a deeply investigated essay called The Numbers Nobody Counts, How the Adoption Industry Became Its Own Only Witness. And we're unpacking its accompanying forensic dossier, too.
Which is just an incredible resource. It traces IRS tax filings, public grants, and these complex sponsor networks.
Yeah. So our mission today is to explore what actually happens when an entire industry operates as the sole witness, researcher, and, data provider for its own practices.
Because, we take for granted that the basic metrics of our society are tracked, right? Births, deaths, marriages.
We assume a neutral party is keeping score.
Right. But when you look closely at this specific area of human life, the server room is just entirely empty. The public infrastructure isn't there.
Which means, if you want to know who is quietly controlling the narrative of this 51-year data vacuum, you have to look somewhere else.
You really do.
And bizarrely, the answer wasn't uncovered by a subpoena or some dramatic whistleblower. It was accidentally revealed by a mundane social media post.
A post with a little blue heart emoji.
Yes, the blue heart emoji. So the investigation really kicks off with this routine thank you post by the National Council for Adoption.
Or the NCA, for short. They're the oldest adoption trade association in the U.S.
Right. And it was just a post thanking their 6 platinum sponsors for funding their National Adoption Conference and Advocacy Day.
Which is a huge event, by the way.
Yeah.
4 days, nearly 400 attendees.
Yeah, a massive gathering. And the post just had, a wall of corporate logos, a standard PR message about advancing futures, and that blue heart emoji.
It looks completely harmless.
Totally harmless public relations. But when an institution publicly thanks its funders like that, they are inadvertently handing you a map of their power structure.
They're telling you exactly who they answer to.
Yes.
And the author of this essay understood that perfectly. They looked right past the press releases and went straight to the public IRS Form 990s.
And for you listening, if you aren't familiar, 990s are the mandatory tax disclosures that nonprofit organizations have to file every single year.
Right. They show everything.
Yeah.
Revenue, expenditures, executive compensation, grants.
It's the public ledger. I mean, it's like finding a receipt in a coat pocket,
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
The PR materials and the blue heart emojis show you the front of the house, but the 990s furnish the room we never fully get to see. You just have to know how to read the receipts.
And the NCFA is the perfect place to start pulling those threads.
Yeah.
Because publicly, they present themselves as this highly neutral, objective infrastructure.
Right. They claim they just do research, advocacy, education.
Yeah, just neutral stuff. Yet, if you dig into their historical financial mechanics, that supposed neutrality becomes, very complicated.
To put it mildly.
Yeah. You have to look at how they built their foundation to really understand their current power.
So let's trace that foundation back to a specific window between 2001 and 2005. Because the 990 tax forms revealed the NCFA took in approximately $20.8 million in federal grants.
From the Department of Health and Human Services.
Right, $20.8 million. And this was specifically for something called the Infant Adoption Awareness Training Program.
Now, on its own, a nonprofit receiving a federal grant isn't unusual. That happens all the time. The mechanism of control, however, is what the NCFA did simultaneously. Because while drawing down that $20.8 million in public funds, they reported roughly $1.72 million in lobbying expenditures.
Okay, wait. I really want to break down the mechanics of this for you listening because the implications are just staggering.
It's wild.
They helped advance the Infant Adoption Awareness Training Program into federal legislation in the first place.
Right.
Then they received massive federal grants to execute that very program. Then they used their operational budget, which was largely derived from that federal money, to lobby the government to keep the program alive.
The architecture is entirely self-sustaining. It operates exactly like a closed circuit.
Wow.
An organization drafts the mandate, secures the funding to fill the mandate, and deploys a fraction of its budget to lobby for the mandate's continuation.
It's basically like building a toll road, lobbying the local government to legally require all commuters to use that specific road, and then securing a massive federal grant to operate the toll booth yourself.
That is exactly it. It generates the demand for its own supply entirely on the public purse.
And the most startling part of the source material, and we have to be clear about this, is the explicit clarification that nobody broke a law here.
Right. We aren't talking about a criminal conspiracy at all. We are looking at a highly durable, perfectly legal ecosystem.
It's just how the system works.
Historically, yes. The bulk of the NCFA's operating budget didn't come from grassroots donations or even agency memberships. It came from this perpetual loop of federal money. They literally built their authority on public funds.
And that loop is what allows them to establish themselves as the definitive authority on adoption data. But, if you fast forward to today, they aren't just relying on federal grants anymore.
No, the landscape of capital has shifted dramatically over the last couple of decades.
Which brings us right back to that blue heart emoji.
Yeah.
And those 6 platinum sponsors sitting at the table today.
The shift to private capital is where the control of data becomes even more pronounced. Let's actually look at who is paying for that sponsor table.
Yes, let's name names.
One of the platinum sponsors is the Opt Institute. They're a private foundation running a project called Adoption is an Option.
And they didn't just, buy a few chicken dinners at a gala. According to the investigation, the Opt Institute directly commissioned and financed the NCFA's flagship National Adoption Counts research.
Exactly. They paid for the data.
Which is, they funded the trade association to update private infant adoption counts, which the NCFA then turns around and publishes as independent, objective evidence.
The industry is literally buying the product that proves its own necessity. It fills that 1975 void left by the government with industry-purchased, privately financed data.
You are substituting a public neutral count with a private one.
Right.
And sitting right next to them at that platinum table is the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. And we really need to convey the sheer scale of this organization.
Oh, it's massive.
The dossier pulls their 990s and notes an annual revenue of $61.6 million.
Just to put that into perspective for you, that is roughly 36 times the NCFA's own annual revenue. The Dave Thomas Foundation is the financial leviathan in this ecosystem. But their real power isn't just money, it's access.
Right, because their president is a founding board member and sitting advisory board member of the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute.
Yes, and independent researchers identified that institute as the main entry point to Capitol Hill.
It's where actual adoption legislation is drafted, workshopped, and shaped before it even hits the floor.
So the largest sponsor at this conference isn't just handing over a check to put a logo on a banner. They hold a permanent structural seat at the legislative table in Washington.
You have the funder of the research sitting right next to the architect of the legislation.
Exactly. And then you have a third entity at that very same sponsor table that completely complicates the dynamic.
Oh, ethical family building.
Yes. Ethical family building.
This one stopped me cold when I was reading it because their 990s show an operating budget of just about $220,000 a year.
They are microscopic compared to the Dave Thomas Foundation.
Tiny, but they are fierce. They claim to have authored federal bills like the ADOPT Act, and they are actively pushing for something called the Adoption Counts Bill.
Right, and the Adoption Counts Bill is designed specifically to force the federal government to resume collecting non-identifying private adoption data.
It is a legislative effort to finally end the 51-year vacuum.
Exactly.
But I struggled with this while reading the source material. If ethical family building is desperately trying to restore federal neutral counting,
right?
Why on earth are they sitting as a platinum sponsor at the same 6-chair table as the NCFA, the very organization that profits from privatizing those counts?
Because it demonstrates the absolute monopoly of this ecosystem. Even a genuinely motivated advocacy group, one trying to regulate the industry and restore an external count, is forced to buy a seat at the industry's own table just to be heard.
They have to participate in the network they want to regulate because there is quite literally nowhere else to go.
Yes. The industry has captured the entire public square.
That is wow. But, capturing the present-day data and monopolizing the legislative square isn't enough to sustain an ecosystem like this forever.
No.
Because if the historical data contradicts their present-day narrative, The whole thing eventually falls apart, which completely explains why a century-old agency is sitting right there alongside them.
You're referring to Spence Chapin.
Yes, founded in 1908.
They are the oldest agency at the sponsor table, and their presence moves our focus from the control of present-day statistics to the physical control of history.
Which is just chilling. Because since 2004, Spence Chapin has been the legal custodian of the sealed adoption records of Louise Wise Services.
And for anyone listening who might not be familiar with Louise Wise Services, they were the agency at the center of the infamous mid-century separated twins study.
And the gravity of that study, I mean, it cannot be overstated.
No. It was a behavioral research project where children, infant twins, and triplets were deliberately separated and placed into different adoptive homes.
And neither the adoptive parents nor the children were ever told they had a multiple.
Never. The researchers then studied the trauma of that separation over decades. They tracked developmental differences, psychiatric issues, attachment disorders, all while actively lying to the families about the existence of the siblings.
The human cost of that is visceral. We are talking about people who live their entire lives feeling a profound, inexplicable absence, only to discover in adulthood that this absence was a deliberate scientific variable.
It's horrific. And the paperwork for all of this, the actual records that detail what was done to these human beings, the notes on their development, the names of their siblings.
Those records didn't burn in a fire.
No, they still exist. They have a physical address.
And the entity holding the keys to those sealed records, the legal custodian of a major historical concealment scandal, is today a platinum sponsor of the industry's own Advocacy Day.
The essay calls this the architecture of silence.
I always equated systemic silence with things hidden in the shadows, you know? We imagine a dusty, locked file cabinet in a forgotten basement.
Right, some hidden room.
But this silence is happening under bright lights at gala dinners. It's a public funding structure filed in plain sight. If the gatekeeper of those sealed records is a platinum sponsor, the word transparency completely loses its meaning.
Because they are the only ones allowed to hold the key.
Exactly.
The mechanism of concealment evolved. The architecture of silence means you no longer have to illegally destroy data or hide it. You simply build a legal framework where you are designated as the sole entity allowed to produce new data and the sole entity allowed to preserve the old data.
The silence is institutionalized and legally protected.
You construct an environment where you are the only witness.
But how did this environment get constructed? Because reading through the dossier, you really realize this wasn't an accident or some gradual passive drift.
No, it was deliberately built.
The essay traces the blueprint back to a specific political and economic shift in the 1980s and 90s, often referred to as the neoliberal turn.
Right. And to be clear, we are just looking at the historical mechanics here. It was a convergence of two distinct groups. You had the Chicago school economists who focused on extreme market deregulation.
And on the other side, the Christian right, who focused on traditional family structures.
Exactly. And we see these two historical movements converge on a single legislative mechanism. The shared goal was to dismantle the state welfare apparatus.
And shift the responsibility for vulnerable populations over to the private sphere, specifically to the nuclear family and to private faith-based charity.
The catalyst for this was the 1996 Welfare Reform Act. And this wasn't just a simple budget cut. It fundamentally altered the machinery of the social safety net.
State budgets for public assistance were slashed, right?
Yeah.
And converted into fixed block grants.
Yes. The practical day-to-day reality meant the government stepped back from direct, localized social support.
They basically rebranded the dismantling of policy as the delegation of compassion. The federal government stops providing the safety net and private charities step in to fill the gap.
But that shift requires those very charities to invent their own self-justifying data to secure ongoing private funding.
Which is where the comparison the author makes with Australia is just incredibly revealing.
Oh, absolutely. Because Australia also experienced a neoliberal turn during the 80s and 90s, and they also embraced the privatization of family separation.
But there was a key difference.
A massive difference. Australia grafted that privatization onto an existing, robust welfare state. They maintained universal safety nets, like Medicare.
Whereas America built this blueprint from scratch. We entirely dismantled the state apparatus and left this completely private, sponsor-driven ecosystem as the only infrastructure.
Yep.
It operates exactly like a piece of software running in the background. It doesn't require a malicious hacker to cause harm. The code itself is just written to prioritize the survival of the system over the well-being of the users.
Which brings us to this brilliant concept introduced in the text, the maintenance economy. A system like this doesn't need a smoky room full of villains plotting against the public. The author writes, and this is a quote, "A conspiracy can be prosecuted, an ecosystem just keeps sponsoring conferences."
I can't stop thinking about that line. I really can't. The NCFA uses federal money to lobby for the conditions of its own future federal money.
Yep.
The Opt Institute buys the research that serves as the evidence base. The Dave Thomas Foundation buys a seat at the Legislative Coalition. Spence Chapin holds the archive that could disrupt the narrative. Every single piece of the machine exists solely to maintain the machine.
The maintenance economy is the realization that the industry doesn't have to actively fight against accountability, just has to outfund it.
Wow.
It sustains itself by simply maintaining a monopoly on the witness stand.
And the fuel for that machine is human data. It's human lives. And I think it's important to point out that throughout the essay, the author utilizes what's known as honest adoption language.
Which is so crucial here.
Yeah, for you listening, if you aren't familiar with the term, honest adoption language is about using objective terminology that centers the adoptee. It refuses to romanticize, sanitize, or commodify the realities of family separation.
Right. It treats the adoptee experience not as some psychological pathology or an emotional byproduct, but as profound empirical expertise.
And when you center that adoptee expertise, the systemic reality becomes very clear-eyed about the harm that's been done. However, and this is key, the essay takes a deliberate post-tragic turn here.
It absolutely refuses to land on despair.
Because the accountability gap isn't a natural phenomenon. It's not a law of physics. It was built by specific, named, traceable financial decisions.
And financial decisions always leave a paper trail.
Always. The author uncovered all of this: the grant loops, the lobbying expenditures, the specific sponsors funding the research, the custodianship of the sealed records in a single afternoon.
Which is just staggering. They didn't have subpoena power. Wow. They didn't have a high-level security clearance.
No, they literally used ProPublica's nonprofit Explorer. They pulled the public 990 tax filings. They just had the patience to follow the money and check the arithmetic out loud in a place where the answers are published instead of buried.
Because the entire ecosystem relies on the assumption that you are too busy or too intimidated to look at the math.
Right. The real threat to the architecture of silence isn't classified intelligence. It is public record.
Accountability doesn't have to wait for a massive, sweeping federal overhaul, even though, legislative efforts to restore an outside witness are critical.
Accountability arrives slowly, publicly, one trace dollar at a time. It arrives the moment you refuse to let a thank you post with a blue heart emoji be the final word.
Exactly.
I highly recommend you read the full essay and dig into the forensic dossier yourself. Seeing adoptee expertise systematically deconstruct a 51-year data vacuum will permanently change how you view institutional power.
It fundamentally shifts the baseline of what constitutes data and who actually holds the right to author it.
It really does. And it leaves you with a lingering, somewhat unsettling thought to mull over. If a half-century data vacuum encompassing thousands of human lives can be hidden in plain sight, sitting right there behind a corporate sponsorship banner and a stack of public tax forms, what other supposedly neutral industries in your daily life have quietly taken over the job of witnessing themselves? And what missing floorboards might you uncover if you spent a quiet afternoon looking up their 990s?